Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. Rajgir, northern India, 483 BCE. Inside a cave carved into a hillside, 500 monks sit in complete silence. Outside, the Buddha's funeral pyre still burns. These monks face an impossible task: 45 years of teaching, thousands of sermons, hundreds of thousands of words, all stored in human memory. No recordings, no notes, no written backup. One monk stands. He begins with the traditional formula, Evam me sutam, thus have I heard. We don't have transcripts of what happened in that cave, but we know the problem they faced. The moment one monk's memory differed from another's, they had a crisis, not of doctrine, of authority. Who decides what the Buddha actually said? This tension planted a seed that would grow for centuries. Within 100 years, monks would be arguing bitterly over whether you could store salt in a cow horn. Within 700 years, new scriptures would appear, claiming the Buddha taught profound secrets he never mentioned publicly. Within 1200 years, practitioners in Tibet would develop intensive methods, claiming to compress lifetimes of practice into a single life. Every tradition faces this question eventually. Do you protect the original form, or do you let the form change so the core can survive? In the centuries that followed, different Buddhist communities answered that question in different ways. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand how one teaching became 3 major Buddhist vehicles, and why that fracture might have been the only way Buddhism could survive 2,500 years. When the Buddha died in 483 BCE, he left his followers with a crisis. According to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, his final instruction was clear: all conditioned things decay, strive on with diligence. No successor appointed, no hierarchy established, no texts written. The entire Dharma existed in the memories of monks who had heard him teach. Some had been with him for decades, others had joined weeks before his death. They'd all heard different teachings at different times and in different contexts, and they faced a brutal reality. Memory fades, details shift. Without action, the Buddha's words could scatter into dozens of conflicting versions within a generation. From the very beginning, Buddhism faced a problem every living tradition faces. How do you preserve a teaching without freezing it? Preserve too rigidly, and the teaching hardens into a system that cannot respond to new worlds, the very attachment the Buddha taught people to release. Preserve too loosely, and the teaching begins to drift beyond recognition. This tension would drive every major split in Buddhist history. We're going to trace how Buddhism went from one unified Sangha to 3 distinct vehicles: Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, the traditions you explored in our video on the 3 schools of Buddhism. But this isn't only a story about doctrine, it's also a story about authority, memory, and power. What you're about to hear comes from sources written centuries after these events: the Kulavagga section of the Vinaya Pitaka, the Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa chronicles, later historical accounts. We don't have exact dialogue. What we have is how these communities remembered their own fractures. But we can trace the pattern, and we can see how disagreements over minor rules created entirely different visions of what the Buddha taught. Let's start in that cave where 500 monks tried to preserve everything. 3 months after the Buddha's death, 500 arahants gather at the Satpani cave at Rajgir. These aren't ordinary monks, these are arahants, monks regarded in the tradition as fully liberated. They've achieved direct realization of the Buddha's teachings, and now they face a deeply human task: preserving a lifetime of teaching entirely from memory. Mahakassapa, the senior disciple, takes charge. The Buddha never appointed a successor, but someone has to lead. King Ajatasattu provides royal patronage for the gathering, and Mahakassapa has the respect of the entire Sangha. He calls forward 2 monks, Ananda, the Buddha's personal attendant for 25 years, the man who heard more teachings than anyone alive. He will recite the suttas, the discourses. Upali, the expert in monastic discipline. He will recite the Vinaya, the rules governing monk behavior. The method is simple. 1 monk recites from memory. 500 others verify from their own memories. If everyone agrees, it becomes official dharma. If anyone disagrees, they debate until they reach consensus. The cave echoes with constant recitation, months of voices repeating the Buddha's words, verification, debate, refinement. And it almost doesn't happen, because Ananda, the man who knew the Buddha better than anyone alive, almost gets excluded. The night before the council begins, Ananda isn't yet an arahant. He hasn't achieved full liberation, and the council is restricted to arahants. According to the traditional account, Ananda meditates through the entire night. At dawn, literally as the council begins, he achieves awakening and is admitted. The traditional account gives us this scene in sharp outline, even if historians debate the exact details. But then, something happens that reveals the real tension. The other monks criticize Ananda publicly. First, he convinced the Buddha to allow women into the Sangha. Many monks see this as compromising the purity of the order. Second, he didn't ask the Buddha which minor rules could be modified after his death. This oversight will become critical. Third, he didn't ask the Buddha to extend his life using supernormal powers. The Buddha had hinted he could live longer. Ananda missed the signal. Consider what this reveals. The man who remembered more of the Buddha's teachings than anyone alive gets put on trial for helping women become monastics. The first council isn't simply about preserving teachings, it's about establishing who has the authority to define what Buddhism means. After months of recitation, the 500 monks reach consensus. The teachings are preserved. Buddhism has survived its founder's death. The Sangha remains relatively unified. In the traditional telling, Mahakassapa declares what has been recited together is the Dharma. What has not been recited together is not the Dharma. This seems reasonable, practical, a clear boundary, but they had preserved the teaching, and in doing so, they had also drawn a line around what counted as authentic. For about a century, that line holds. The Sangha remains relatively cohesive. Monks travel across India, spreading the same teachings, following the same rules, reciting the same suttas from the collective memory they carried. Without palm leaf manuscripts, without any written backup, the Pali Canon itself would not be written down until centuries later in Sri Lanka. For generations, it survived only in memory. But Buddhism is spreading, moving into new climates, new cultures, new economic realities, and the Vinaya, the monastic code, was designed for a very specific context. What happens when those conditions change? That question will explode at Vesali over the most mundane issue imaginable. Vesali, 383 BCE. 100 years after the first council, a wealthy merchant enters a monastery. The heat of the eastern Indian summer presses in. He places a bag of gold coins at a monk's feet, a donation to support the Sangha. The monk smiles, accepts it. An elder monk from another region watches this exchange. His expression darkens. According to the Vinaya recited at the first council, monks cannot touch gold or silver. This rule is explicit in the code, non-negotiable. This monk violated it. Or did he? Over the next century, Buddhism spread far beyond the social world in which the Vinaya had first been recited. Monks now lived in hotter climates, different economies, communities shaped by local customs. The early Sangha had never needed to address these situations. The population exploded from thousands of monks to hundreds of thousands of monks. New generations arose who never knew the Buddha, and regional variations developed. Because the Vinaya, detailed as it is, doesn't cover every possible situation. The monks in Vesali, the Vajrayana monks, claim 10 practices are acceptable. The 3 main disputes, storing salt in horns for preservation in hot climates, flexible timing for the noon meal in different regions, and accepting gold and silver donations when refusing them would potentially alienate crucial support for the Sangha, plus several other disputed practices around ceremony timing, assembly requirements,